This will be for the con exercise, distance between 2 points. All right, so we have 2 points here, and the first number is always x, and the second number is always y. Okay, so I'm going to label the first point x1, y1, and the second point is going to be x2, y2. So the formula for the distance, representing distance with the letter D, that's going to be the square root, and it's going to be x2 minus x1, quantity squared, plus y2 minus y1, quantity squared. Okay? Now, as a matter of fact, the order that you subtract the x's and y's doesn't really matter, but I'm going to explain that at the end. So we'll just do it the basic way for now. Okay, x2 minus x1, we labeled this x2, so I'm going to do -3 minus -5 in parentheses, -3 minus -5, and that gets squared. And then for y2 minus y1, I'm going to do -8 minus -6. Okay, and that's in parentheses, -8 minus -6. And that gets squared as well. Okay, now whenever you see 2 negatives in a row, you can make it positive. Okay, -3 plus 5 is 2, and that's squared. Again, 2 negatives in a row is positive. -8 plus 6 is -2, and that's squared. Okay, so 2 squared, 2 times 2, that's 4. And -2 times -2 is also 4. And of course, 4 plus 4 is 8. And don't forget, that's still under the square root. So we don't round off for these. It's going to be multiple choice. Okay, and that's your final answer, the square root of 8. Now notice for the negative, I use parentheses, okay? And that is because -2 squared is not the same as -2 parentheses squared. Okay, you want to make sure you have parentheses because this is positive and this is negative. And we always want positive, okay? We're dealing with lengths. So they're always positive. So make sure you use parentheses and get positive numbers under that square root after you square it. Okay, so the answer here is radical 8. So let's look at our choices. All right, scrolling down, we have radical 8. Now, again, I wanted to mention the order that you subtract doesn't really matter. Okay, so you can subtract going this way on the x's and then going this way on the y's. It doesn't matter because it's squared. All right, if you do 3 minus 5 and then square it, that's going to be -2 squared, and that's just 4. And if you do 5 minus 3 and square it, that's going to be +2 squared, and that's also 4. So the order you subtract doesn't matter once you square it. And if you want to, you can always put the larger number first. This way, when you subtract, it will always be positive. Okay, you don't have to do that, but it might make it a little easier. Anyhow, square root of 8 is the final answer. Okay, here we have the line on the graph. What is the length of the line? Now, we can do coordinates for this, but we really don't have to. We're just going to use the Pythagorean theorem, okay? And it's really the same thing. So instead of using the distance formula, I am going to use a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay? And we're going to construct a right triangle. All right, so this will be the hypotenuse, and you just want to draw horizontal and vertical lines, like so, and then make a right angle. Okay? So the side across from your right angle is always the hypotenuse. That's C. Okay? Across from the right angle is C. A and B, it doesn't matter which is which. Okay? So I'll call this A, and I'll call that one B. All right, so in order to find A and B, all you have to do is count how many units. Okay, right here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so for A, we're going to use 4. And then for B, just count 1, 2, 3 units. Okay, so for B, we're going to use 3. So A squared is going to be 4 squared. B squared is going to be 3 squared. And C squared, we don't know. That's what we're solving for. Okay, 4 times 4 is 16. 3 times 3 is 9. And that's C squared. 16 plus 9 is 25. Taking the square root, the opposite of squared is square root. Taking the square root of both sides, square root of 25 is just 5. Okay? Now, I understand -5 would also work because it's squared, but we're dealing with lengths here. So C is just +5. You could discard the negative answer. And by the way, if you wanted to let the calculator do all the work, you can just take the square root at this step right here and then enter this in the calculator, the square root of 4 squared plus 3 squared, depending on what kind of calculator you have. All right, so it's answer B. C is just 5. Okay, what is the distance between the following points? So this is actually on a graph with numbers. Okay, now you can use Pythagorean theorem again like we just did, but I think on this one, they want us to actually get the coordinates. So let's do that. All right, so for this point here, the x coordinate is 7, and the y coordinate is 9. Okay, so that's 7, 9. And for this one here, the x coordinate is -2, and the y coordinate is 7. All right, so we're just going back to our distance formula. The square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Okay? It doesn't matter which one is x1, doesn't matter which one is x2, okay? You're just subtracting x's in square, subtracting y's in square. All right, so let's do the x's first. I'm going to do 7 minus -2. Okay, 7 minus -2, and that is squared. And then for the y's, I'm going to do 9 minus 7. 9 minus 7. And that gets squared. Okay, once again, the x is the first number written, and the y is the second number written. All right, so square root, 2 negatives in a row is positive. 7 plus 2 is 9, and that's squared. And 9 minus 7 is 2, and that's squared. Okay. 9 squared, 9 times 9 is 81. 2 squared, 2 times 2 is 4. And 81 plus 4 is 85. And you still have the square root. So that's it. Any further, we would need a calculator to round it to the nearest decimal, but they don't have that as the answer, okay? They have their answer in this form, so don't round off at the end, and that is just the square root of 85. So if we go down here, that's answer D. All right, I'll do one more with the Pythagorean theorem. What is the length of the line? Okay, there's no numbers on this graph. So let's just find the side lengths and construct the right triangle. All right, going down, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that side length is 5. And then we have 1, 2. That side length is 2. Okay, this is a right angle right here because this one is straight up and down. This one is straight left and right. Across from your right angle is always the hypotenuse. That's always going to be C. The other sides, it doesn't matter which is which, so I'll let this equal A and this one on the bottom equal B. All right, so we're just doing Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay, A squared is going to be 5 squared. B squared is going to be 2 squared. And C squared is C squared. Okay, 5 times 5 is 25. 2 times 2 is 4. And that's C squared. 25 plus 4 is 29, and that's C squared. The opposite of squaring something is to take the square root. So the square root of C squared is just C. So that's the final answer, radical 29. Okay, you don't need to go into decimals. Their answers are not like that. So one little mistake I made before, I said you can take the square root here. That may be true, but you really have to calculate this part to get to 29, okay? Because if you enter this in the calculator, it's probably going to give you a decimal. Their answers are not like that. So you really need a whole number under the square root. Answer C, square root of 29.